Nahum chapter 1. A revelation about Nineveh. The book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. Yahweh is a jealous God and avenges. Yahweh avenges and is full of wrath. Yahweh takes vengeance on his adversaries, and he maintains wrath against his enemies. Yahweh is slow to anger and great in power, and will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. Yahweh has his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry, and dries up all the rivers. Bashan languishes, and Carmel, and the flower of Lebanon languishes. The mountains quake before him, and the hills melt away. The earth trembles at his presence, yes, the world and all who dwell in it. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the fierceness of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and the rocks are broken apart by him. Yahweh is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who take refuge in him. But with an overwhelming flood, he will make a full end of her place, and will pursue his enemies into darkness. What do you plot against Yahweh? He will make a full end. Affliction will not rise a second time. For, entangled like thorns and drunken as with their drink, they are consumed utterly like dry stubble. One has gone out of you who devises evil against Yahweh, who counsels wickedness. Yahweh says, though they be in full strength, and likewise many, even so they will be cut down, and he shall pass away. Though I have afflicted you, I will afflict you no more. Now I will break his yoke from off you, and will burst your bonds apart. Yahweh has commanded concerning you, no more descendants will bear your name. Out of the house of your gods I will cut off the engraved image, and the molten image. I will make your grave, for you are vile. Behold, on the mountains of the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace, keep your feasts, Judah, perform your vows, for the wicked one will no more pass through you. He is utterly cut off. These little books in the Old Testament, they're great. The minor prophets, they're called minor because they're just not big books. It's not that the things they had to say were of minor importance. They're still important. Nahum is a prophet we don't know very much about, and he prophesied sometime between the years 663 BC and 612 BC. So in this 50-ish year period, he prophesied. We know that because later in the book of Nahum, in chapter 3, he talks about the destruction of Nahum, which is a city in Egypt which we now call Thebes, and that happened in 663 BC. So he's talking about something that's already happened, so we know he's prophesying after that point, but he's prophesying the destruction of Nineveh, which hadn't happened yet. That was 612 BC. So he's in between those two dates. So it's Nahum. He's called Nahum the Elkoshite, and there's a huge discussion about where is Elkosh. He's an Elkoshite. Well, there actually is a town in Israel called Elkosh. How you spell Elkosh in this book is E-L-K-O-S-H. The town in Israel, Elkosh, is A-L-Q-O-S-H. Sometimes with the English language, we put different English letters in, but it's the same thing. So probably the same thing. And however, even though there's that town there, which is way up on the border way up near Lebanon, there's quite a lot of people that don't think that that's where he comes from. And there's another popular thought that he comes from the town of Capernaum, because the word Capernaum or Capernaum, literally means the village of Nahum. So there's a whole group of people that think, Capernaum was a town where Jesus did a lot of preaching, and in Luke chapter 4, he was in the synagogue at Capernaum and he preached from the Isaiah scroll. He was in the village of Nahum. So there's a whole group of people that think, that must be this Nahum. Well, it could have been. There's some other thoughts as well. In the end, we don't actually know, but I do like the idea of the sound that Jesus was in his own village. That does sound pretty cool. So we don't know much about this guy. We know he preached in this 50-year period sometime. He was a person who preached against Nineveh. Now, what's very interesting is we've only just done the book of Jonah. And Jonah was someone who preached against Nineveh too. So Nineveh is at this point the biggest city in the world. It's huge. The Bible calls it the Great City. Diodorus Siculus, an ancient historian, said 600,000 people lived in Nineveh, so a big, big city. And it's the capital of the Assyrians, who were horrible, bloodthirsty, brutal people. And when we were going through the book of Jonah, Jonah had a bad attitude about the Assyrians, and he, first of all, didn't want to preach there, but then when he did preach, he was angry at God that God had mercy on them and didn't destroy them like he said. But God does eventually destroy them, and when Nahum comes along to preach more than 100 years after Jonah, this time it is... Jonah came with a message of judgment, 40 days and the city will be overthrown. But they heard it and they repented. But Nahum comes along over 100 years later with a message of judgment, but this time it's decided, it's happening. The people of Assyria are too wicked, their hearts are too hard. God knows they're not going to change this time. So Nahum preached the message that Jonah wished he preached. Jonah wished he could have been Nahum, except he didn't know that this was going to happen. If Jonah had been able to sit on the hill, Jonah set up on the hill to watch the destruction of the city that never happened while he was alive. But if he had been able to sit there for like 150 plus years, he would have seen it. And so Nahum now comes and preaches a judgment message. In fact, all 3 chapters of the book are along this theme of judgment. The chapter starts out by saying, Yahweh is a jealous God who avenges. He is full of wrath. He takes vengeance on his adversaries. And he says in verse 3, he does not leave the guilty unpunished. So it says lots of things about how strong he is. He rebukes the sea, makes it dry, all of this. God knows how to punish. And through the prophet Nahum, he's saying, I'm going to wipe out Nineveh. I have decided. In verse 3, it says God is slow to anger and great in power. So it seems like it doesn't fit. It's going along saying he's full of wrath. He's angry. He doesn't leave the guilty unpunished. But he is slow to anger. The point about that is he has been very patient with Nineveh. It's not saying like God's angry, but he's kind as well. No, he's both. He's kind and angry. He's been very kind. He's been very patient. It's like the principal of the school that has a bully, and the bully goes around and is mean. And the principal says to this kid, if you don't stop leaving other children alone, I'm going to have to kick you out of the school. That is kindness. But if the bully pulls out a knife and stabs another student, now he's going to be kind to the other kids. He's going to definitely be angry and kick that kid out of the school. Anger is also kindness, and in the Lord it is kindness. The world had been troubled by the Assyrians, and I'll show you exactly what I mean in a minute. It's the very last verse of this chapter. But the Lord, in dealing with this problem, was being kind. He was being kind to everyone else that needed the problem dealt with. But the Lord was also kind to the Assyrians, and we saw it in the prophet Jonah. Jonah came and preached this message 150 plus years earlier. Well, they realized, we need to change. That generation was spared, but as an overall group, they didn't change. And so eventually the Lord's kindness got to the point where he realized, now I need to be kind to everyone else. So he punished, and he was angry. He was angry that they were not able to treat other people properly. He was angry that other people were not being looked after, because God cares about everyone. So he is righteous in his anger. In verse 8, it says, but with an overflowing flood, he will make a full end of her place. So what happened was, we get this from Diodorus Siculus, the ancient historian. The Babylonian army, along with the Medes, came to attack the city of Nineveh, and they were camped there. But elsewhere, there was huge rain. and the Tigris River flooded. The Tigris River flooded up in against the city and actually undermined or collapsed a whole big chunk of the wall. So a whole big chunk of the wall of Nineveh, which is really strong defense, collapsed, and the Babylonian and the Mede armies went straight in. They lit huge big parts of the city up on fire, and then in verse, was it verse 9 or verse 10? Verse 10, it says that they will be consumed like dry stubble. So like you throw a match into a pile of hay and up it goes. So they were destroyed by both floods and fires. Even though they seemed like they both couldn't happen, they both happened, just like this chapter describes. Unbelievable. So we get right down to verse 15, and it says the strangest thing. It says, "Behold, on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news and publishes peace." In the New Testament, it's in Romans chapter 10, verse 15, Paul quotes something very, very similar to this verse. It's slightly changed, and he says, "Blessed are the feet of him who brings good news." So he's kind of quoting Nahum, but with a slight one or two words changed. And in the New Testament with Paul, Paul says that, and we think, oh yeah, when someone comes and brings the gospel, that is a blessing, that gospel that changes your life. But he's getting it from Nahum. What's it doing here in Nahum? I'll tell you what it's doing. It's when someone heard that Nineveh was destroyed, that news was so wonderful and exciting that whenever anyone would go and share that news, they were welcomed. It's like World War II when the war was over. Have you ever seen those photos of the Nazis have been defeated and there's millions of people throwing hats in the air and celebrating? See, the news that the Nazis were defeated was good news, and it made millions of people happy. The World War II was such a horrible scourge, so many people dead. Death, disease, plagues, bombings, people losing family members, boys going off to war, men going off to war and not coming home, women becoming widows, children becoming orphans. The whole thing was so horrible that when the war was finally over, when the Nazis were defeated, that was good news. And so the Lord declares Nineveh is going to be destroyed. He says in, what verse is it? He says that they will afflict you no more, verse 12. He said that they will be destroyed and will not rise again. And he said, "Blessed on the mountain are the feet of him who brings good news." So when anyone went to share the news that Nineveh had been destroyed, there was a celebration. That's how evil Assyria was. So you can't tell me that God wasn't being kind by being angry. He was being kind. The whole world was celebrating when Nineveh was destroyed because they were horrible. But Paul takes this verse in the book of Romans and he uses it for the gospel. And it's great news too. When you get the news of the gospel, that is definitely worth celebrating. But also, it's not just the gospel alone. It's also the fact that when Jesus went to the cross, he destroyed the devil. And the destruction of the devil and his power, that's also wonderful news too. Lord, thank you for Nahum chapter 1. Bless the people who are listening to me today. Let them love you more. Let them appreciate you more. And Lord, we thank you that the devil and his schemes were defeated at Calvary. Now empower us for holy living. Amen.